Well, I'm glad everyone can make it out early on a Saturday morning. I'm glad to have you guys here. My name is McCracken. I am the founder of a company called Level 10. And actually, so I founded the company back in '99, but actually started my web development a little bit before that. And got to start web development in the glorious old days of the '90s where companies threw money at problems. And in particular, people didn't really know how to build websites. And so what's neat is back then, we actually get these big budgets to go out and prototype websites and videotape how, and give people tasks and videotape how they would do things and watch where their eyes would go and their hands would go and things like that. And what's interesting though is after the recession in 2001, almost noticed a total reversal of how websites were built. People went away from testing, they went away from, a lot of the usability work, and really everything kind of moved to heuristics. And we started seeing like a lot of questions people started asking. A lot of our clients have asked over the years, a lot of things we've even asked internally and a lot of times even debated and had different answers internally. And I think a lot of this comes because we don't do the same amount of testing that we used to do in the old days. And so, I've always been fascinated by how do we answer these important questions in these days where we have smaller budgets and we can't do the usability testing that we used to do. And so in particular, it kind of boils down to three types of questions that I think websites need to be answering and agencies need to be answering their work with their clients. First of all, when we make a change to the website, does it have a positive or a negative impact? Second of all, and this is a question that's kind of haunted me most of my career. Early on, I was working for a bank, and the marketing manager said, he said the kind of a Pareto principle. He said, we know that 80% of our results comes from 20% of our efforts. We just don't know which 20%. So we got to keep doing all of it. And I've always wondered, what if we could start to figure out what's producing the most results? Could we build a system to help us do that? And then the other thing is, what's my return on investment? I actually go to a lot of different meetup groups. And actually, I kind of have like a foot in development, I have a foot in marketing, and I have a foot in project management. So I go to a lot of these different ones. And in particular, when I go to social media meetups, it's really interesting how people talk about followers, they talk about all these different things. But whenever the concept of ROI comes up, suddenly there's no real good answer. Everything becomes real mushy. And and even like a lot of internet marketing, and I find that the internet is so much more measurable than other types of marketing. And so we should be able to get to maybe not a perfect answer for what's my return on investment, but we should be able to come to a good answer on what's my ROI when we're doing projects. And so these are the types of things that I've kind of been over the last 3 or 4 years, been really interested in solving and building some systems to help us do that with Drupal. So what seems to me needs to be done is we need an intelligent system. It's almost like when we build these websites, it's sort of like we send them out into the world and they might be bumping into walls and we don't know that. And so what we need this feedback system to let us know what's producing value. And so that's what I phrase as the intelligence system. And really there's sort of two sides as I see to intelligence. One side is, what are people doing? What kind of behavior are we seeing on the website? And in particular, when we make changes to the website, how do we see that behavior change? And two, who are these people? In fact, something I found really interesting is that there's for certain organizations like AT&T, there's actually now requirements that you not only have to have your website be Section 508 compliant, you have to prove that you are delivering an equal experience to those people who are visually impaired. And so, they need to know who are those people on our website and are we delivering an equal experience? And they're struggling with these kinds of answers, and then all kinds of different people, from if I have a CEO on my website or if I have someone who's looking for a job versus someone who's looking to be a client or something like that. Who are those people and how can we treat them differently? Of course, this gives rise to all the personalization that's now kind of become a hot area on the web. Skip that slide. So another area I've always been kind of fascinated by is, how do you build a great organization? And there's a book I read several years ago called The Fifth Discipline. And really what's about is there's a gentleman by the name of Peter Senge who started an institute up at MIT. And what it's all about is, how do you create learning organizations? And the idea is that, nowadays, it's hard to create differential advantage based on products, based on methods of manufacturing, based on a lot of different areas. But one of the best things you can do is create an organization that learns better than others. And really what he breaks things down into is sort of a 5-part framework of how you create a great learning organization. And the first thing is you have to have great people. They're knowledgeable and so forth. That's pretty obvious. The second thing is that realize that people have mental models. They have these rules of thumb, the way they think things should be. And this is actually what we see a lot of in web development teams. That we're developing all these websites based on all these rules of thumb, things they think they should be, things that we go to camps to learn. And a lot of times they're right, but not always. And one of the biggest problems is a lot of times people don't challenge those mental models. They hold on to these things for a long time. One of my favorite ones is that, and this has always been an internal debate for years, is things like flat menus versus drop-down menus. And then what was interesting is we've noticed that people have held on to a lot of these beliefs for a long time on which one's better, particularly now we have the day of mega menus. And it's like, who's really doing testing and gathering data to really verify that these are the mental models we should be working around as far as what's best? And so we need to be challenging these things on a regular basis, and with the lack of usability that we see on a lot of projects now, that doesn't happen very often. It's also important that everybody has a shared vision. And of course that gets into sort of how you create objectives in your organization and so forth. The third thing is you need to create team learning. And what's interesting is, there's really kind of an interesting point from the book. It talks about in America, for the most part, whenever we discuss things, we tend to debate. We tend to argue one point versus another point, where actually a big part of team learning is how does someone start an idea and then somebody else adds to that idea and somebody else adds to that idea, more of a dialogue, which actually might be kind of apropos for our current election and so forth. But he said, really good organizations, they are able to achieve these first four, but there's a fifth one that is missing in most organizations. And the one that he's most passionate about, I'm really most passionate about, it's called systems thinking. It's a way of connecting all these different things to create a closed system. And in particular, my background, I'm actually a chemical engineer by education. And what I wanted to do when I came out of college was write control systems for chemical plants. And it's all like how we have all these inputs going into reactors or distillation columns, things like that. And what kind of outputs do we have? And how do we adjust these things? How does it affect things? And so effectively, that's what systems thinking is sort of about, is that we have these black boxes and we put inputs in, and how do we measure the outputs and get the correct outputs or improve the outputs? And so effectively what I've spent the last several years building is a control system for websites. So systems thinking. Systems thinking is actually fairly straightforward. You create a black box. We don't necessarily know all the little things that are going on inside this black box, but we know that we've got a website that's a boundary. And actually there's a lot of other things inside of our website that can be boundaries that we'll talk about. And there's all these different inputs that we have. We have things like creative and our usability, our UX, our features, what types of things we're enabling people to do. The type of content that we're creating. This is a big one, because that's something that you're continually feeding into a website. You have your traffic sources, which a lot of times, sometimes you can't control. You might have limited control over, but there's certain types of traffic sources that we can control and see as we adjust them or which ones are more valuable. And then you have the visitors themselves as inputs of our system. The tricky part is, how do we measure the output? And of course, actually, let me go back to this real quick. It won't let me go back. Okay, so quick little anecdote about, in fact, I was telling Dave Terry this at lunch yesterday, I have an uncle who, he actually went to Harvard undergrad, went to Harvard Business School, ran a bank, sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars, kind of one of the most brilliant businessmen I know. And when I started my business, he gave me one piece of advice, and that was, what you measure goes up. And I'm like, really? That's your one piece of advice? But what's interesting is over the years, there's actually brilliance in that simplicity. And so one of the things that we want to do is we need to measure the important things on our website. So what a lot of people do, of course, is there is a solution for how we figure out what the outputs are of our website. And it's using an analytics system. Pretty much, who here is using Google Analytics on their website? Okay, pretty much everybody. In fact, actually, it's kind of interesting. A few years ago, when I was doing these presentations, there still were a lot of people using other analytics systems. And now you see that very, very rarely. It's probably about 3 or 4 times now. Probably talked with over 100 people, and no one is using anything other than Google Analytics. So a lot of people, they install Google Analytics on their website, and suddenly you've got some 200 measures. You've got things like how many people are coming to the website. You've got how many hits are you getting per session, and all of these kinds of things. But the thing that's interesting is they don't really tell you what kind of business impact you're having on an organization. And when I say business impact, it might be a corporation. It might be a nonprofit. It might be a candidate. And impact can be how many people are ordering yard signs to put into our yard, or how many people are downloading applications or signing up for our events. So it's not just about business. And one of the ones I've always found kind of fascinating is that I remember years ago when we were doing a usability study, we had the client saying, well, we want to get people engaged on our website. We want to get time on site up. Well, actually, for most of the usability work was about how do people find things faster. Usability or time on site went down because people found things faster. Also, call center calls went down considerably, which was important too. There is a way though to solve in Google Analytics how things that produce business impact. So on an e-commerce site, when someone purchases something or someone does something significant, they're called goals. So pretty much most people here raise their hand when we're talking about who does Google Analytics. How many people have goals, have been setting up goals on their website? Okay, only a small few. Okay, this is kind of one of the great, if you get one thing from this presentation, it's set up your goals on your website. It's fairly straight. We'll get into a minute how they work, but it's kind of sort of like when someone does something of value, like they submit a form. Like on a web agency website, someone requests a demo request or requests a sales call or something like that. We track that as a goal and we can put a numeric value around that. The tricky part, though, is that once you've got your volume metrics and your goal, to me, there's still something that's missing. We spend a lot of time helping people do content marketing and trying to get people to engage with websites better. Generally, what gets missing is measuring that engagement. Things like people sharing things in social media, how deep people watch into videos and things along those lines. And so there is a way actually in Google Analytics to measure this also. It requires a little bit of extra JavaScript, but they're called events. And we'll talk a little bit in a second, like how to use these together. So in an intelligence system, these are some of the types of events that we're running. It's actually kind of neat in Google Analytics. If you're pushing all this stuff through, you can actually watch in real time as these things are happening. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about them, but things like social sharing, even when people are clicking back from social shares, when people comment, when people are viewing calls to actions, when they're clicking on calls to actions, all of those kinds of things are all things that we want to be tracking. So the tricky part is, if we do this, we've got our volume metrics, we've got our goals, we've got our events, we can end up with well over 200 different types of measures. And the real question becomes, well, we want to create actionable results or actionable analytics that whenever we make a change, how do we know which analytics are important that went up? And so the trick that I like to use here is to bring it back all to a single value. In fact, there's actually a trick that you kind of learn in freshman economics, the concept of utility. And this idea that you've got all these different things, like, you say, I want to compare apples and oranges. I want to compare apples and oranges. Well, that might be fairly easy to do, but what if you want to compare apples and airplanes? These become tricky, and so the idea is let's bring it back to a single non-dimensional unit called utility. And notice how much value does this thing produce? And then we can kind of create, we start to understand in sort of this normalized way, and we get sort of a single value that we now can understand. When that value goes up, we've made improvements. When that value goes down, we did something wrong that we may want to think about reversing back out of our project. So how to measure this stuff? So a little bit about Google Analytics goals. So with your Google Analytics account, you get 20 of these goals. And so you might set up something like a main contact form. You have to use an outside service, but a lot of people are going to track phone numbers. Like you can do something like that through Twilio or something like that, or some other types of services that are out there. There might be like a specific page you want people to get to. Not a great goal, but some people, that's what they want to do. But a lot of times you're tracking forms being submitted. If you're e-commerce, it might be things like something being purchased. You get 20 of these that you can set up. And generally what happens is you just say, when someone hits, say, this reaction page, the response page to a web form submission, now it has this value. So you might say that when someone submits our contact form, that's worth 25. And Google kind of interprets that as $25. On the other side, there's something that happens a little bit similar called events. And events actually give us a lot more capability. In particular, instead of having just a single label, we now can have 3 levels of categorization. We can have categories, we can have actions, and we can have labels. So you can have something like CTA, click, and then what CTA was clicked. Something along those lines. You can put any kind of value you want on it. And the other interesting thing, we'll get into this a little bit later, you can put custom dimensions and metrics on it. So for example, if someone clicks on a particular CTA, you can say, what was the color scheme of that CTA? Or what was the headline of that CTA? And then you can do A/B testing to figure out the difference between the two. The cool thing about events is they're unlimited. You can have as many of them as you want. You can make them be whatever you want. The other thing that's a little bit goofy about goals is goals only trigger once. So if someone, let's say for example, you set up a goal, if someone shared in social media and they share one blog post on Twitter, that would count as a goal. And then they go to another page, they share that on Twitter, it'd only count the goal once. And that's intentional. So that's why goals are not great for tracking engagement. And so we can track both total numbers and unique counts. And then one of the biggest challenges though in events is that events have a value, but that value isn't interpreted as a dollar value like it is with goals. And there's times where we want to do it, there's times where we don't. Like, so for example, one of the events I like to use is how deep someone watched into a video, and the number I push is either normally I like to use the percentage, a 1 to 100 score that they went into the video, or you could push the time. That's not a value. But there might be another time where you say, well, someone actually watched this video, I want to say that's worth $2 or something like that. And so there's times where I do want an event value to be worth something. And so here's some little tricks that we kind of came up with. The first thing is track all things that are interesting from an engagement standpoint with events. What we like to do is that if we're putting a value that is meant to be a utility value, we put an exclamation point at the end. And that way we can easily pull back, okay, show me all valued events. And it'll pull back, it won't pull back things like someone just viewed a conversion page. Because that doesn't have an exclamation point, but it will pull back things like someone shared in social media or someone commented on the blog. And then the other trick that we like to do is if you can use an event to trigger a goal. Instead of just what most people when they set up goals, they set up where it goes to a landing page, but you can actually use an event to trigger a goal, and that way you get a bunch of extra data. You get that category, that action, and that label all associated with it, and you can push custom values. Where this is really nice is, for example, if you might have a contact us form and you've got a field in that contact form where you say, what's your role in the organization? And if someone puts C-level, you might say, okay, we want that conversion to be worth 100 versus a normal conversion to be worth 25. Well, because it's all dynamically through JavaScript, you're able to do that by using events to configure. So this is typically the types of events that we like to measure. These are events that trigger goals, form submissions, phone calls. These are events that we use, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that we use to track conversion workflows. And these are engagement events that we like to look at. When people click an email, social sharing, clickbacks, all that kind of stuff. So, take a look at, I won't worry about that. So then what we can do to create that utility score, and I know this takes a little bit of a build-up, but it's actually pretty powerful when we get to this score, what we can do with it, is what I kind of like to do is to basically add up scores from three different sources. One are going to be your goals, so those are people calling you, becoming contacts, things like that. The other are your engagement values. And then the last one's a traffic value. I like to put like small numbers because there is some brand value to someone just coming to your website, particularly if they go to multiple pages on your website. And so we want to build a system that adds up value coming from these three different categories. And so, this is a part of the intelligence module that allows you to put in value. And so it sees, like, for example, when someone does a contact form, that's worth 25. When someone plays a video, that might be worth 2, and you can switch out which videos that might count for, and things along those lines. When someone just hits the website, that might be worth a nickel. If someone goes to a second page, they don't bounce, it's worth a dime. Every page after that's worth 2 cents. And so now we can start to add up all the activity that's going on the website and come up with a single score. So I'll show you what this kind of looks like. Let's see if I got my internet connection. So we're able to do now, Facebook stuff coming up, is create a scorecard for our entire website. And so, one of the biggest things that I've always tried to move our clients away from is don't look at just hits, don't look at just visits, move to value. And so that's what this chart's doing, is it still gives them the hits they want to see, whether it's going up or down, but these green bars, those are the actual value that's being produced by the website. And then as we go down, we can see what is driving that value. So down here, we can see how many contact forms there were, how many, say, ebook downloads, how many social shares there were, things along those lines. But not only can we score the entire website, we can start to score pages. And we start to look at, and what we do for scoring pages is we kind of look at, well, when someone comes into the website on this page, what do they do on this page and what do they do on the whole trail after that? And we give maybe a little bit of score if it's a part of a conversion trail. And so now we can start to understand which pages are producing the most value. Could be through engagement, could be like leading people to conversions and things along those lines. And then we can also go down and look at what traffic sources are producing the most value. One of my favorite things to kind of look at is the different social media platforms. So, for example, if I go to look at social networks, I now can get an idea of. So, if we look here, we can see that LinkedIn is producing a lot more value per entrance than, say, Facebook is, or Twitter's producing even half of that amount. And so maybe we want to spend most of our time focusing more on LinkedIn. Looks like Meetup's doing an interesting job. I didn't realize they listed Meetup, Google listed Meetup. But so we start to understand, of course, when you start doing PPC, you start doing things like that, you start to understand the value that, that different keywords are producing and so forth. So a tricky thing, so when I first kind of was developing this, I think I put it on our website somewhere around 2013, and it creates a tab on everyone's blog post that gives them that scorecard for their particular blog post. And what's cool is it was kind of neat watching the intended effect. I didn't tell people that it was there. I mean, people knew I was building this thing, but I didn't tell people it was there. And then I walk in at what we call Lunch and Learn, where we get a bunch of people in, we're just teaching on stuff. And there's 4 of our developers that are in there talking about what scores they were getting on their blog posts and how many shares they got. And one guy going, well, mine got picked up in Reddit. And then they started trying to figure out, like, well, which ones are getting the best scores? So for a little while, they're sitting there trying to beat each other out, getting a little competitive. In fact, our designer, who's a swimmer over at Emory, she got very competitive and got very into like doing all these like pretty pictures and all stuff. She learned pretty quickly that, you know, that was a way to get lots of people to your blog and get lots of people sharing your posts and all that kind of stuff. And that was really kind of cool because none of these people are marketers. None of these people knew much. We just say, hey, if you learn something interesting, write about it on the blog. And now they're actually looking at the impact. But what became tricky after a little while is we realized that, yeah, you could look at this post did better than this post. But it became difficult to understand why was that. Was it the length of the post? Was it the topic? Was it the tone it was written in? Those kinds of things. And what's interesting, so we looked to solve that problem or to try to get a better handle on that problem. It turns out that once again, Google Analytics has something that helps us do, and they're called custom dimensions. There's actually a few different ways of dealing with this. So what we basically want to do is we want to be able to pass attributes over into Google Analytics. So who's the author of a post? Who is, how long is it? All these different types of things. Well, Google Analytics sort of has 3 different ways of dealing with it, having to do with the different times. So the old version of Google Analytics has something called custom variables. You only had 5 of these. And so they were somewhat limited unless you bought like the pro version. They had something that was kind of goofy for a while that's kind of interesting called content groups. It does something roughly the same, but it's a little bit set up more like, say, these are all blog posts, or this is a section of our website. But when Google Analytics went to Universal Analytics, which launched, I think, in 2014, they now greatly expanded this whole concept into custom dimensions and metrics. And with custom dimensions, you now get 20 of these things. And you can associate these types of things, these attributes, with either hits, which is a page level, the session, or the visitor. And this allows us to do some pretty interesting things. In particular, what's cool is having a content management system. We've got all kinds of things that we can push. Things like content type, taxonomies to understand the topic of something. We can count the number of words in a page. We can count the number of words in a title. There's all kinds of different things that we can use and push over to Google Analytics to start to create these attributes. In fact, some of the ones I really like, they're kind of interesting, is that, you know, people might say, well, when I write, you want your writers to have a hook. What hook works the best? Is it best to put top 5 this at the top of the page, or those types of things, or even what tone people are using? And we can push all that stuff over into Google Analytics and then get a better handle on the types of traits we should be doing. So I'll show you a little bit of what that kind of looks like. So over in the content section, we're scoring all contents together. And then what I have is all these different segments. And so, for example, I can go down and see what authors. And this does take a little bit to generate because it's having to pull a bunch of different requests back from Google Analytics to generate this report. So this will take a second to build. But what it'll do is it totals up it basically says, okay, pull all the stuff back. I want to understand who the authors are of all this different content. And then I'm going to show you, so what we look at is that Kristen Brenner, she has 17 pages, and her average, her blog posts are producing, or the content that she's writing on the page is producing 3.1, say $3.10 that's actually the wrong score. The score I want is that one. Is producing 27 cents of value per day per post that she's writing. So she is doing much, much better than me, although I'm a little bit of an anomaly because I've been writing since our blog was in WordPress in 2005. So a lot of those posts are really old, and there are ways to filter out and say, I just want to look at the posts from this year, or something like that. But in this report, and so maybe we should have Kristen give a talk about what she's doing that's getting people all engaged. And so we can look at things like authors, we can look at things like what time of day something is posted, the readability score, was it written at a 9th grade level or a college level, character counts, all kinds of different things. Things like, what taxonomies are producing the most, what subjects are producing the most interest. I will let that one, okay. So, and as we all know, Plant Drupal's its own beast. But when you start looking beyond that, it looks like development posts are doing pretty well. In fact, development posts are producing on average 4 times the value of a marketing post, which is kind of interesting. And so, that's where we start, as we build our editorial calendar, we start looking at what type of content would people find the most interesting. So one of the next problems we wanted to solve is that, so we're, for all you people who have Google Analytics, how many people actually look at your Google Analytics at least 2 times a month? Oh, good number, good number. How many people are sharing that analytics with their development team? Okay, a small number. This is the interesting thing. We see this over and over again, particularly in larger organizations, that there's an analyst whose job is to look at the analytics and do a bunch of spreadsheets and give information to management. But the people who are building the websites are the developers and the designers and the UX people. They're the ones that really need the data. And so, the tricky part is, going back to sort of our empirical process here, our process control, is that, these requirements come down from the stakeholders. We do Scrum, so it's sort of product owner, as we'd call it. And then the product owner and the managers and the team, they come to these mental models on how to build all this stuff. What we really need is a way to get this data back into the hands of the developers. So they might understand, oh, actually for our audience, flat menus is not a good answer. Or this particular type of content is not the best type of content for this. So one of the key things to an empirical process is we need transparency so that we can do inspection and then we can adapt and create actionable intelligence. So the best place to do it is not have our data over in Google Analytics. Let's integrate it into Drupal. And there's a lot of different ways we want to do it because that's where all our developers and our content people are living. And so even little things like, of course, you can kind of tell here, this is a Drupal site, and you've got your reports and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes people don't go to that part of how often do people really go to the reports part of their website? But people all the time are going to this content page. So, hey, let's hack a little JavaScript in and let's give people the score of how all these pages are doing so they see them on a regular basis. So interestingly enough, so now as you're going through, you can tell what pages, how many hits they're getting and what kind of value they're producing. Another great way to integrate it in is when you go to, say, a blog or a wiki page or anything that's kind of attraction content. So for example, here's a bunch of blog posts. I'm going to go down and do this one. We now have a tab that the author of this post can see and the editors of this post can see. And when they click on this, they're now going to get a scorecard for all the things going on their page. They now get a lot more transparency. And so what we'd see is that, and this is a typical blog thing where a lot of interest in the beginning and it kind of dies down over time. But we can see that it was shared in social 5 times. A CTA was clicked on once. Things along those lines. And here are all the different attributes that are being pushed along with this blog post. So the content type is blog post. The word count is 1,000 to 1,200. The title word count is 18 words. Wow, that is long. Some editor probably should have caught that. Anyway, that's what happens if you pick an example out of a hat. So see, already creating actionable. Yeah, 18 words is a little too long for a title. I'll have to go figure out what that was about. But anyway, so we start to have all these attributes. And so then we can also click down and go, well, how is this blog post doing compared to other 1,000-word to 1,200-word blog posts? And so now I just clicked on that. It applied a filter. Now it's going to pull back. It's actually going to do a scorecard for all those combined. If I want to look at individual, or if I go down here, I can see, okay, hers is the top one that's in that word count range. And then there's another one by Lauren. So hers has the next amount of value in that content range. And so maybe there is something to longer blog posts. A lot of people talk about that blog posts should be, for SEO purposes, blog posts should be 300 to maybe 500 words, but maybe for actual value driving, it's better to have these longer posts. And we've got the tools to dig into that. And okay. Oh, another thing that's really useful is when people submit forms. So these would be just web forms that people are submitting, knowing like where people, web forms or marketing automation forms or things like that, knowing where are people from. Just little things like that, integrating all of that into the CMS, because that data is available to us through Google Analytics and even actually through like other systems like AddThis. And then kind of the last area where I think we're going to start to see a lot of explosion in intelligence. And we've always seen this in the Drupal world, where personalization is becoming a much bigger thing. Well, there's so much data on the web, and there's so much things that your website can do to gather it. We want to start tapping into this. And so Google Analytics does give us ways to understand our audience. So when people are going on our website, we know where they are geographically. We know what OSs they're using. You can turn on some special features to even get things like interest. Are they interested in sports? Are they interested in gardening or different things like that? That's kind of interesting. And they'll even try to give you some demographics, how old are people, maybe what gender they are and stuff like that. But the other thing that we can do is we can attach attributes to people. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is as people are navigating through our website is add a point for each, we normally do something a little more sophisticated than that, but in general, add a point for every topic they're looking at. So we get to start to build a profile of what this person's interested in. So a couple of points on how to do this. One thing you can do is you can associate a tracking, a hashtag with every person that's coming to the website. And what that allows you to do, and they're still anonymous, you don't know who they are, but you now can pull out individual people as they move through the website. And I love this from a usability standpoint. Like if you're in a call center and someone can't find something and they call in, the call center rep can ask them, or it can figure out what's their hashtag and then look at what are the pages they hit, how much time do they spend looking at these things, and maybe we can look at that. We've got some usability issues with this website. The other trick is that we can also timestamp everything they're doing. And that allows us to create click streams so that we know every step that people can take through the website. And then, of course, we can use the segmentation. So we might want to look at how do C-level people do things on our website? How well is it resonating with them versus, say, a marketer or developer or designer or someone like that? One of the other things I'll show just a little bit about how the visitor stuff works or what it kind of looks like. Let me clear that filter. Actually, I'll just go to visitors. So this is going to show the kind of the top most valuable visitors on our website. In recent years, it'll probably be someone from India who hits our website every night asking us to outsource stuff to them. But So what you see is there's a lot of people that are just anonymous. They haven't submitted a form with a name, so we don't know who they are. But there are other people that have submitted forms. Oh, yep, there's a recruiter, and there's... Anyway, actually what I love to use this is when people are applying for jobs to see how deep they read into our blog, and things along those lines, how deep they get into what our culture is and so forth, versus are they just applying for a job. I'll actually run over to our contacts. And so here are a bunch of people. So the ones without email addresses, those were phone calls. Actually, I will go ahead and use Philippa, who was testing. I don't want to go there. I want to go, let me look at the click stream of what she did. And so what the click stream is basically where it's now saying, okay, I know the hash of this person that's associated with all their hits on our website, and we've timestamped everything. So now we can go and reconstruct. And actually, this is a person internally, so I took a little while to build. So this person's been hitting the website a lot because it's an internal person. But you can see all the different hits that this person is having on the website. And then if we want to, we kind of got like a little, that's interesting, she went to our website through Google. Hits a blog post, probably logged in there. Yep, she's logging in as a super user. Shouldn't be doing that. See, now I've got another thing I got to go address. Okay. Anyway, so you can see kind of basically see all the steps that she's been taking through the website. And then the other thing that we can do is that whenever someone submits a form, now we do have an email address, and so we can hit that against an API like a full contact. And we can also hit it against other things like the Google API, the Add This API, the Discuss commenting, those kinds of things. Pull all of that information in, even hit it against maybe internal databases that a company has, and use the website to sync all that data. And so that's what's happened here, is that this is someone internal, but this information's coming from Google Analytics. This information's coming from here. We've got a permissions issue. We just moved to another server, so we've got a permissions issue. There should be an icon there, but it found her LinkedIn profile. And now it only is going to find things that are public accessible, and the visitor tracking only works if people can turn it off in Google Analytics. In other words, they turn off their Google Analytics tracking, the stuff stops working, so it's only publicly accessible. There's no sneaky way of getting their email address or something like that. They have to submit a form and so forth. But once they do, we can start to know a lot more about who they are. Like, can we find their clout score? A lot of times we can. And now we know they're an influencer. Maybe we want to give them a special, some sort of special invite because of that. And so this is the kind of stuff that I see websites doing in the future, is understanding better who these people are, getting the right content to them. And of course, once we start to understand, hey, this is someone who comes to our website, we might flag them as a VIP, and we start to give them a personalized experience on the site. And then one of the last things that is important to track is conversion workflows. So one of the biggest... most of the work we do is development, but we do a decent amount of marketing work for clients. And what's interesting is a lot of clients come and go, oh, we need more SEO, or we need more social media. We need to get more people to our website. Interestingly enough, the biggest impact area has been 9 out of 10 times is optimizing conversion workflows. That generally has a much bigger impact than SEO or some of these other things. And so we wanted to have a good system for optimizing this stuff. And so basically a conversion workflow is you're going to have a thank you page. And it might be that someone's requesting a demo, maybe they're downloading an ebook, something like that. So this example, someone's downloading an ebook, we call it top of the funnel offer or an educational offer. And so whenever this page gets hit, we want to know, hey, there was a landing page conversion that came from this landing page, and then we also say this how many landing page views there were. So now we can take how many submissions were there and divide that by the number of hits, and we've now got a conversion ratio. We can take it one step back further, because one of the big things you want to do when you're doing integrated content marketing is you want to have calls to actions on things like your blog pages, your wiki pages, things like that. And so every time a CTA is shown, we can do an impression. When someone clicks through it, now we can get a click-through ratio. And then when someone submits that form, we can get what was the conversion ratio on that CTA. And then the cool thing is you mix in those custom dimensions, and now you can start doing A/B testing. You can start saying, okay, well, in fact, you can have a whole set of high contrast CTAs, have them mix into your website, and now you're going to get a score of how are your high contrast CTAs doing compared to your traditional CTAs. And what I will say, one of the things I love about this is for years we've heard people, or even our internal people debate all this stuff. And we say, all right, well, let's set it up as an experiment and let's actually go test it. So like this is a typical thing that we'd get out of it is that we can see, for example, here are CTAs on our website. You've got how many impressions you have, how many clicks. Actually, this isn't our website. This is a demo site, I guess. But then you've got your conversion rates. Because the other big thing is a lot of times CTAs will get people over to a page, but the CTA doesn't match up with what's on that page, so you have a low conversion rate. So it's important to track also. And then here are things like how are our conversion forms working? Oh, I guess somehow I jumped to that early. Anyway, so that was just kind of like what the full thing looks like. So anyway, this is what we kind of see as like the future of websites. That websites will not be just about managing content, but helping people do more intelligent and better things, particularly with content, but also design and UX and features and things along these lines. So any questions? Yes.
Are you pushing this stuff through Google Tag Manager data layer tags, or are you able just to grab it right out of Google Analytics without?
This is straight Google Analytics. So actually what ends up happening is it runs two trackers on a website. So you install the regular Google Analytics module. That would act as your primary tracker on the website. And then this would run a secondary tracker. One of the reasons is you lose a little bit of data because there's a time delay, like time stamping everything and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you lose about like 3. Well, the other thing is there's some bot filters and stuff like that. So sometimes it's a little hard to tell, but normally it's about 4%. Some would get caught up in bot filters. But it runs two trackers. We looked at the tag manager. The thing about the tag manager is there's a lot of things that's in this that sort of replace what the tag manager does. It just ended up being sort of like a lot of duplicate. And the tag manager, because there's also, what I didn't show is there's a lot of things where you can like set up events and you can set up all this kind of stuff, which is what the tag manager is set up to do. And so it's sort of like we've kind of created a different interface that's more Drupal-like. So you can say, okay, I'm going to create an event for when someone clicks on a video, and then I'm going to go and say which pages I want to apply it to using Drupal's admin, instead of having to write custom JavaScript. So yeah, that's why we haven't really played that much around with the tag manager.
Well, I've tried to play around with it a little bit. It's pretty dense.
Yeah. So we're like I said, because mostly what we're doing is we work with marketers we work with content people, marketing people, and how do we enable them to do more with their website and tag managers, you need a pretty technical person, to deal with tag manager. Yeah.
I think you're showing that the utility was brought into the content page, so the editorial could see the score for a particular content. Mm-hmm. What module did you use for?
So all of this is a part of this module called the intelligence module. So, and now the intelligence module does piggyback on top of the Google Analytics module and also the, I forget what the name is, it's kind of changed where you can pull the data back from Google Analytics, the API interface. But yeah, it's all a part of the intelligence module. Yeah.
Have you run into any problems, like sometimes when you're trying to track, you mentioned a lot of analytics and you were doing, you mentioned even like comparing apples and oranges kind of thing.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like when we're analyzing our page visits and comparing that to the events and trying to figure out, they're two different measures, but yet there are some things like, for example, we may want to compare like how many times someone went on a certain page on our website versus they actually went on our Facebook page, for example. Obviously, those don't get counted the same as page visits because it's an external site, but yet we want to, have you run into any problems trying to compare the two, or should we just keep them separate? We'll create an event for Facebook, how many times people go on our Facebook page, and it seems kind of tough because you're wondering, okay, is there any way, or should we compare the two?
So, yeah, well, let's see, where to start on that one? Okay, I'd basically say there's two categories of external pages. There's external pages that you can control the JavaScript code that goes on it. So like, for example, this is set up, like we use HubSpot, and we have clients using Marketo and Eloquent. So we have external form builders that we need to track across those things. It is set up to do that, but we have full control of that. Where you do run into problems is something like Facebook, where you can't put full control. All you've got is a basic tracker. And so I'm not even sure in Facebook if you can do a basic tracker, but you can on things like SlideShare and stuff like that. So unfortunately, yeah, when people go over to those things, because we can't put custom JavaScript on there, we can't do all the time stamping and all the user agent and all that stuff. But because of the way all the session stuff's being tracked, when they come back to the website, we can track what they're doing. The thing that we've done this with LinkedIn until LinkedIn decided to make their API private, is we did have a thing where it would capture someone, and you could do this with other platforms. You might be able to capture their email address and then merge together analytics from those platforms. So like a good example of that is we do an integration with Add This. And so you can get some information from Add This if you have on multiple properties using the Add This tracking. But yeah, in general, with platforms like Facebook, when they limit what you can do, there's not much you can push. Any other questions?
Plans for Drupal 8?
Oh boy, there's the magic one. That is one of the big things we're trying to figure out. Yeah, there's nothing in fact, what's crazy is, I'm actually an old Java developer, and in 2005, the biggest thing I wanted was an object-oriented framework and object-oriented CMS. Now we have it, and it's sort of like, what's trying to figure out how do you make this stuff sustainable, that we're doing. That's a really tricky animal. I mean, it's something we want to tackle. And we actually do a lot of this work as a part of we have a distribution that's sort of built for doing content strategy and content marketing, and a lot of the things play into that. And so it's probably going to be a part of when we move into that. The other thing we've started on doing, sort of as a case study, is to moving a lot of the things we're doing into Node. So we can get like faster responses and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm kind of waiting for that part of the project to kind of finish, because that'll make it a lot easier to move into Drupal 8. But for right now, we basically install Drupal 8 every couple months, going, that module's not there, that module's not there, and go, all right, we'll look at it again in another couple months. Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed some problems in testing, maybe to see how much Google Analytics actually tracks? One of the things we kind of ran into was sometimes users, by default, coming from Windows computers, and I think it was 8 or 10, had a default setting that wouldn't allow Google Analytics to track it, and then trying to...
Firefox does that a lot. Yeah, they're trying to differentiate by being, the crazy one is Opera. Oh, in fact, fun little story. Yes, so there are problems with that. And, it's sort of like 90% data integrity is better than none. But yeah, you're right. In fact, we had a crazy deal happen where suddenly we had this blog post that was just getting insane amounts of traffic. And it was all coming from someplace in South Africa. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And it turns out that Opera runs all its stuff through a proxy in, I forget which country it was or something like that. But the interesting thing is we eventually figured out what happened, but it took forever because of the way the proxies ran and everything. We eventually figured out there's some website where like students can ask questions of each other. It's almost like a Stack Overflow, but for students. And for some reason, it became a really popular topic about setting goals for your life, and we had a blog post on it. And I mean, it was weird because like someone would ask a question, we get this huge spike in traffic, and then it'd go away, and then all of a sudden someone would ask the same question, in fact, and just kept doing that. But yeah, it was because of the way the proxies were working. And I mean, there's not really much you can do about it, and that's the thing is people can turn off Google Analytics tracking. It's a privacy setting. And yeah, when that happens, you're not getting any data from them. Mm-hmm.
That spike that you mentioned, was it sort of like, was it all at once then? Or, because we've had those where there's been spikes from places that we would not expect to get, and we actually ended up taking them away, or filtering them out of our radar because we thought it might have been a Google bot or something.
Right, and that's actually what we thought at first too. But because of the pattern of what was going on, and then normally, like, yeah, if there's a bot, like if someone's doing keyword spamming and all that stuff, you just go put the filters in Google Analytics just like you would, using a regular, and it'll filter out that data. And that's what we thought at first too. There's just some kind of new spam or something like that. But there's I think what it was is for some reason we actually using information from Webmaster Tools, we figured out what the phrases were that people were searching for. And from that, we're like, no, I don't think this is a bot. And then eventually we were able to figure out like which site it was coming from and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, that one is legitimate. But you're right, yeah, the keyword spamming, to deal with that, just like you deal with it just the way you would with straight Google Analytics, just put a filter, into your property. Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you guys all made it. Good crowd for Saturday morning. Now I got a little caffeine in me.